Hello, everybody, and welcome in to the Bitcoin Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Cory, and on today's episode, I'm going to go a little different. I've kind of discussed this before, but would Jesus be a Bitcoiner? There's a couple other things I want to talk about with it, a couple angles that I want to explore, and I know if you're not a religious person, go ahead, roll your eyes. But it is Good Friday, and I think there's good reason to kind of explore this. So before I get into that, though, get a Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Go to bitbox.swiss/Bitcoin Made Simple. Use promo code Bitcoin Made Simple to get 5% off your order. Also, shout out to Barefoot Mining. Go to barefootmining.com. They are looking for like-minded energy providers and investors who want to help secure the Bitcoin network. With all that being said, yeah, it's Good Friday. And I'd been kind of bouncing this topic around for a minute, and it's been going around in my head for a while. And I've said this before on the podcast. I've been like, would Jesus be a Bitcoiner? And my answer is yes. If you look at what he does during Holy Week, for those of you that don't know, he enters the temple and sees the money changers and the people making it into the temple into a market. And he's particularly upset with how they are stealing and cheating other people by currency manipulation and things of those nature, and not charging people an honest amount, and yada 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 yada. And so as a Bitcoiner and as a Catholic, it always is my favorite, because I'm like, what's the one time that Jesus got mad in the Bible and like showed righteous anger? It was whenever he flipped the tables of the money changers and called them, said that they were turning it in the temple into a den of thieves. And I think Bitcoiners can really relate to that. I think they should relate to that. And so I've always, religion is not about money. But Bitcoin, in a way, is also not about money. Like we talk about how it puts the power back in the hands of the people. It doesn't rob people of their wealth and their time, and helps them enjoy life instead of having to live in the rat race. And I believe that there's a very similar threads within Christianity of people, learning to focus on the right things. Um, and that is a big part of why I feel like these two are connected. Um, and another reason I feel they're connected is that, I don't know about you guys, but me as a Bitcoiner, I think I became a Bitcoiner because I have an like unending appetite for truth, you know, of like, I want to know, it's not that I don't trust other people or anything like that, but it's like, you know, you tell me the Great Pyramids were tombs for Egyptian pharaohs. Well, I want proof of that. I want to go through. I want to research everything. I want to look through all the details. I want to poke holes in everything. Um, and so that's what happened with me in money, in Bitcoin, because I was like, well, Bitcoin sounds great, but I need to make every argument against it. It's part of the reason why I don't even argue about Bitcoin with people or debate people, because I'm like, I've literally made all these arguments. I don't feel like having them again. I've done this with myself. I've pulled this through the filter a million times, and I know a lot of Bitcoiners are the same way. And I keep pulling it through, and guess what? It always comes up smelling like roses. Every time somebody comes up with an alternative, some kind of shart coin or something, they will inevitably put it out there and it's going to solve all the problems. And then it's like you sit there, and if you just take with their surface, like their bullet points on the surface of what they say it can do, you're like, yeah, man, this is great. Um, Not the case whenever it comes to uh, looking through the details and really going through it with a fine tooth comb. Because I mean, Bitcoiners automatically say every shart coin is a joke, and that is true because everything that can be done on, that any solution people try to propose can be done on top of Bitcoin as a layer 2, layer 3. Bitcoin is the base layer, is the most important. But there are people that will come in with like very good intentions. So, they're not trying to disrupt the Bitcoin system. They're like, oh, I have this idea and we could do this way. Um, and you have to educate them and bring them across to understand that it can be done on top of Bitcoin and yada yada. Um, but it's like everything you look through, you pull it through, you look through this prism, you pull it through whatever filter, and it keeps getting refined and refined. Um, to a more polished vision where Bitcoin is the answer and where the BitBox02 hardware wallet is the best one you can get. And for me, the same thing has happened with my faith in Catholicism. And, uh, so I'll give you guys a little background. When I turned 18, my dad was like, it's yours now. You do whatever you want. Don't get me wrong. That guilt tripped me. But he was like, you don't have to go to church. It's up to you. And I did go to church almost all the time still, because at that time, I mean, I maybe missed every once in a while, but in as amateur as this is, but it's just where I was as a young adult. I was like, I like to go on Sundays. I would go in the evening when it was quiet, and it was like, I was like, oh, once a week, it's just a place of peace and quiet to just like kind of let my brain relax, just mellow out for a minute. So, as bad as that sounds, that's really like sadly, my main focus was going to church for a while. But I would always get encountered with, you know, questions about my faith and my reality. And before you jump all over the Catholics, it's like, I get it. Is the Catholic Church perfect and infallible? Absolutely not. Do I have tons of problems with the Catholic Church and those in the leadership of it? Absolutely. Um, I won't get into the weeds on it, but I have lots of problems uh, with them and with certain things that happen. But I would sit there and I'd go, well, just the general question of like, well, this can't be my faith just because it was what my parents told me to do. Like I have to really decide for myself. And so I remember the initial time I was kind of like, it's like unsettling, rocking the ground underneath your feet to be like, this thing that was stable and always there. I was like, you know what? I'm going to challenge it and I'm going to dig in and start to see if this really is what I should be focused on. Um, in my initial one, it's like it was kind of like a nice big filter with big holes in it. Pulled a couple of the snags away. And the filter kept getting more refined over the years. But that's what helped me. Like I said, I have a lot of problems with the church and the people in charge, things like that. But the thing that's most challenging for a lot of people who don't like that, the Catholic Church, is that if you follow the lineage all the way back through the church fathers and all the way to whenever it began, there is no schism from the Catholic Church. it was always the same. Um, you know, things progressed and changed, and different layers were added. But you can trace all the way back. I took a year-long course. It was a 2-semester course in college. It was called the Origins of Christianity and something like the beginnings of the Gospels. And she was very upfront, like, I won't. She was like, I'm not going to tell you what my religion is, but we are going to go through this with a fine tooth comb, and I'm going to give you how it is, how it was. And you can walk out of the class and you will not get a bad mark. You can, submit that you want to be uh, removed, and I will let you, drop the class, no problem, because it can be challenging. And so I thought about it. I'm like, yep, all right, this is going to be like the first big challenge. I was 22 at the time. It was an end of college. Like, it's like one of those courses where you know how it is, your senior year of college, you kind of fill in a couple gaps with some, and I saw, I didn't think it was going to be a challenging course. I thought, oh, well, I went to Catholic school and grew up Catholic. So origins of Christianity, I'm going to crush that. Um, Ironically, there were no tests, but it was very challenging, it was very challenging, um, to read through everything and really examine where everything comes from. And the crazy part was we learned that how they wrote at the time. So one of the things we learned in that class, and this is where like I think I really started to fall in love with discovering the truth behind stuff. So the way they wrote back then, they did not write in a straightforward narrative. That's not how scribes wrote. Things like the parables and all that kind of stuff were not always meant to be taken as literal. And there's different ways within the language that you can parse out when they're being literal, when they're not. Um, I'll give you a little example. So it's a Good Friday example here. Um, so if you've heard of the Good Friday story, and you hear about at one point, they have Jesus standing in front of the crowd, and Pontius Pilate says, "You can have once a year. I release a prisoner on Passover, and um, so you can either have Jesus or you can have Barabbas." If you've heard that story, and then they all chant Barabbas instead of Jesus. They want Barabbas to be released instead of Jesus. Pontius Pilate releases Barabbas, and then my teacher, my professor at the time, she goes, "Here's an interesting note. Um, there's reasons to understand why they were using a metaphor here, but also there's no historical evidence of Pontius Pilate ever releasing a prisoner on Passover. Wasn't a thing." Um, Now, Aramaic is the language they spoke at the time. And in Aramaic, if you break the name Barabbas down to Bar Abbas, it means the son of the father. It's a phrase. And it was just a metaphor to say that they chose to not believe that Jesus was the son of the father. They chose that somebody else would be the son of the father. And stuff like that just blew my mind. And I'm like, whoa. And the coolest part about it is, like I said, I kept going down this truth path to seek things out like that. And I would always get to points where I'd have a little trepidation, thinking like it's going to rock my faith. And then I'd be like, wow, this doesn't actually rock it. It actually solidifies it. Um, And it's just wild to get to this point in my life and be fully starting to, not fully, but grasping it at a point that I never thought. I mean, I'm almost 40 years old, and that was when I was in college, and it has been such a journey from there to here. And been filled with constant testing and pushing, because, like with Bitcoin, how I'm a truth seeker, it's like I was actively pushing to try and discover the truth. Ironically, I was in that class when that it was 2 semesters. Satoshi released the white paper, and Satoshi started running Bitcoin with Hal Finney, all while I was in this class. Just a little side note. So I had this insatiable appetite for truth. And I remember I would tell so many people the Barabbas one is the easiest like one to break down, but there's a lot more. And I'm not like a biblical scholar, so don't come at me and be like, "Sumba chapter, John chapter, blah blah blah, blah 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 blah." Um, I'm just telling you, there is a lot. There's a lot like that. So then I have another point in life whenever, um, I have a friend who's the smartest person I know intellectually, uh, starts talking to me about origins of human history. And I was like, whoa, dude, like, is it gonna challenge my faith? This is like 5 years ago or something, even longer. I forget when. He said, yeah, it might. And I told him, I said, I can't do it right now. I was just in a spot where I was like, look, I'm kind of not on, like, I don't have solid footing right now to really take that challenge on. And it's important to understand when you have solid footing and when you don't. And I knew myself enough to know, I was like, I don't have solid footing right now. I need to wait. So it was about 6 months. And then I went back to him. I said, all right, I'm ready. I want to hear you out because you're the smartest person I know. He's a truth seeker as well. And so if you want to, you know, explore the origins of human history, I want to hear your perspective on it. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on everything, but needless to say, um, he was an atheist, and I won't tell you his beliefs. I would just say he believes in something, in higher power, all that kind of stuff, all the good stuff. Uh, he went the opposite direction than a lot of smart people went. His search for truth led him to believe that there is a God and all that kind of stuff. And it was, it was fascinating because it was through archaeology and reading as much history as you could possibly read and ancient texts and translating things and looking where things got translated wrong and how they were properly translated. And it was fascinating that this wasn't like a 10-minute conversation with him. This was like, you know, 30 plus hours of discussion. Um, and the amazing thing is, and he pointed this out, but it started to happen, is he goes, I just couldn't believe as I started to put these pieces together from human history, he said these ancient biblical texts just started lighting up like a Christmas tree. It was like, this connects to this, and this connects to that, and this is here, and that's here. And, for example, just a little one. Every ancient civilization has a flood myth. Like I grew up thinking, oh, Noah, that's probably like a fantastical story that was told. And then you learn that every single ancient civilization around the world has a myth about how the world became flooded. And you're like, whoa, that's weird. How do they have that in Egypt? How do they have that in the Middle East? How do they have that in Asia? And how do they have that in South America when they couldn't communicate to each other? They all have their own version of it. And then you realize, oh, this happened around 12,000 BC or something. Yeah, 12,000 BC. Oh, that's when the Ice Age ended. The Younger Dryas, if you're familiar with that. Oh, maybe that Noah story is legit. And then there's another one too. Here, this hit me like a ton of bricks. My friend goes, he's like, dude, for someone that's in your faith as much as you are, you really need to understand what you're reading more. Because he goes, why did Adam and Eve get kicked out of the Garden of Eden? And I was like, well, simple. Eve ate the apple and gave it to Adam. He ate the apple from the forbidden fruit, and they were like, and he's nah. What does it say? What does it say? It says they consumed the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So let's back that up a little bit. Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. They are living in heaven on earth, essentially. Everything's perfect. Everything is fine. And then this devious serpent comes along and tells Eve, like, there's more to know. There's more things out there than the knowledge that good and evil exists. Can make you like a god, can make you a god yourself. And so that was it. It wasn't a piece of fruit. And it just blew my mind that I'm like, how have I heard this a million times? And I've never realized that's what it actually says. Like, it was the knowledge of good and evil existing is what caused humanity to fall. Asking for, seeking, and accepting that knowledge is what caused humanity to fall. And I'm like, that's wild. Which is interesting because I'm constantly seeking knowledge and truth in everything. And the more I do that, you have to be careful. You cannot go at it from the angle that you want to be the all knowing, all powerful everything. You have to go at it from the angle that I'm trying to understand everything fuller. So when I learn these things, the more knowledge I gain, the more humble I become in my faith and reliance on Jesus and God. Um, you know, in a similar thing, I mean, there is like a little bit of a Bitcoin tie in there because the more, initially I just wanted to get rich off of Bitcoin. And I always thought that Bitcoin was not divine, but like if, like I said, if Jesus were to choose a currency, he'd probably choose Bitcoin. Um, and the more I learn about it, the more humble I become because the more I realize, like, dude, there's so much more than just getting rich off of Bitcoin and the price going up. This solves so many more problems that thinking about price is actually trivial um, compared to the grander scheme of things. And that's how I feel with religion is that, like, focusing on small things compared to like, or trivial compared to the big picture. Um, and so where it all has led me, where uh, my current mind has been stuck on, is that uh, there's two things that the Protestant, non-Catholic Christians deviate from fiercely. And in the Last Supper, which would have happened yesterday, in a non-metaphorical sense, if you study it and understand, um, Jesus takes the bread and the wine and says, "This is my body, which will be given up for you. Take it and eat." Um, and you rewind the clocks to a little bit earlier. He says after the feeding of the 5,000, and he has thousands and thousands of people following him because of his message and his miracles and everything. And then he gets down, and if you watch the show The Chosen, I think it's very well done in all. But it is made by somebody who's not Catholic, and that's okay. But they conveniently left out this part in the story because there's this huge crowd following Jesus, and it's like he's got all the momentum in the world, and then he comes out and he's like, if you do not, I tell you truly, if you do not eat my flesh and drink my blood, you do not have life in you. And then everyone leaves. It's like, I mean, to give you a Bitcoin perspective, it would be like Bitcoin's so popular, everyone's there. And then all of a sudden, Satoshi was just like, I don't care if the price ever goes up, or the price doesn't matter. And everybody'd be like, oh, that sucks. That's weird. Um, and only the 13 apostles were left. And they were like, we have nowhere else to go. Because he said, aren't you going to leave? And they said, no. They were witness to something that they knew they didn't understand, but they knew it was the truth. And there's something to that. We don't always understand. And honestly, like, there could be Catholics that go through this and they're like, this dude's saying blasphemous things left and right. I don't really know. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm just telling you where my brain's going on this search for truth. And it keeps bringing me back to, because then I started looking through, people can turn a blind eye to it, but there is such a thing as Eucharistic miracles, where the communion turns into a bleeding piece of human flesh. It happens to always be a piece of heart tissue that, according to scientists, is alive from a living person. It's always from the right ventricle, which is the ventricle that pumps the blood back out into the body and sustains it. It's always from a human heart that is in physical distress, from a man in his early 30s. And the crazy part is, through independent studies, without people knowing what they're studying, they've taken multiple samples from these Eucharistic miracles around the world, and guess what? The DNA matches. It's from the same person. So I know I'm going to get a lot of you guys annoyed that I'm talking about this, but, and I'm not turning this into a religion podcast. This is just Good Friday. It's a one-time thing. But I thought I'd share it with you guys because guess what? That's where that's where seeking the truth has led me. It's led me to that conclusion. It's wild. It's wild that is where we've landed. I'm like, wait a minute. The DNA matches? Guess what? The Shroud of Turin, if you've ever seen that, where it's purportedly the image of Christ on his burial cloth that they say was only possibly imprinted. It was like a photo negative that was left on the sheet. And it was only possibly done by a burst of sunlight with the radiation as powerful as the sun. Guess what? The DNA sampled off of that matches the DNA from the miracles. I'm not telling you that you have to believe what I believe. I'm just telling you that don't sit in your comfortable don't sit in what's comfortable. Get uncomfortable. Because if you're a Bitcoiner and you're listening to this podcast, you've done that with money. You've gone through the whole process of not sitting where it's comfortable to sit. In the religion, people like to get in a comfortable spot. They like to sit where it's comfortable. And I'm telling you, as someone who kept going after the uncomfortable, the parts that made me not so sure, it opens up to something much more beautiful, something much better. So Bitcoin does that too, because if you're going after if you're going after a pure form of money and you don't sit in the comfort and you go after ask the uncomfortable questions and seek the uncomfortable path that leads to the ultimate truth, it's something more beautiful in a world where it can be fixed from something like Bitcoin. And the same thing has happened with my faith. So all I ask you is don't dismiss this. Don't just brush it off. Seek out that uncomfortable question. Dig deeper and find the real truth. Because it's all about that. It's all about that and getting a BitBox02 hardware wallet. And I will talk to you guys next week.